Welcome to the Albany Film Festival presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. My name is Paul Grondal. I'm the director of the Writers Institute. Before we introduce today's guests in this very special presentation, I would remind you that you can find out about all the events at the film festival by going to our website, albanyfilmfestival.org. This conversation and our others will also be presented and archived on our YouTube channel, NYS Writers Institute on YouTube. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. So today we have two of the creative artists involved with a in-progress, in the works documentary on Louis A. Swyer, an iconic figure in Albany in the Capital Region. We have director Norman Berns. We have the editor Susan Peehl. And welcome, Norman and Sue.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So this is about a kind of a towering figure in the history of Albany. He's since passed away. Lou Swyer built many of the well-known buildings, was involved in the arts, was a poet himself. I want to talk about, how did you get involved with this, Norman? I know the Swyer family is supportive and involved in it. How did you first get involved in this project?
I met Carol Swyer through Mike Camoin and his labs. Carol had a project, and I became fascinated with the project. She had presented it maybe a year before I got involved, but it just struck a chord with me.
Right.
And Carol and I talked, and then we talked again, and then we talked again, until I finally said, let's do this, and she agreed. It has been a very long time. Dealing with somebody like Louis Swyer has been consuming. This is a man who had his hand into almost everything in Albany. And the more people I would talk to, the longer the list became of the people I needed to talk to.
Right.
So what I thought would be 2-3 months of filming, which is about usual, has continued on. We're virtually done. There's maybe one or two other people I'd like to talk to, but when COVID finally settles down, I hope to get to them. But for the most part, it's a matter of putting this together now.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the process and when you bring the editor involved. So I'm happy to say that I'm in the film. I knew Lou Swyer as a journalist. I worked at the Times Union for more than 35 years. And I've just watched the 6-minute clip promo to kind of give viewers at the film festival an idea of what the film's going to be like. And in that film, there's at least a dozen people of all these facets of his life. So you must have a tremendous amount of footage. At what point do you bring Sue, the editor, in? Is that later in the process after you've shot everything, or is it earlier on? Or
I personally would like to bring in an editor as early as humanly possible. The editor is a collaborator on making the film. I can't do this without someone like Sue, who's able to look at this footage and break it down very quickly. It's not, when you look at the piece we did, there's nothing linear about it. It's not like we're going to go point A, point B, point C. We have people we interviewed at different times, different days, different months, talking to each other. And the film will be like that too. Those connections, the way that a man like Lou Swyer was able to work with so many different people, all become part of the film, and that complexity is part of the film. And Sue is the great puzzle connector who's able to ferret all that out.
so let's talk about the challenges of COVID, Sue. I mean, pre-COVID, you both have list of credits on IMDb, which will include in our film festival website and things. But normally, I assume you'd be in like an editing room with your director looking over your shoulder, or is that old-fashioned? And how do you do it now?
No, editing room looking over the shoulder is actually preferred. It's wonderful. because you really get to, like, I see my job as seeing what Norm brought to me and then seeing what the material is speaking and trying to be the translator for the material, talk to Norm, say, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm hearing you say. And then we work together to try and find out, well, how do we make that come together?
Right.
And it's a wonderful process, and it usually involves building a nice relationship between the people working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So another featured filmmaker in the Albany Film Festival is Sam Pollard, who's both, directed many of his own documentaries. He's edited Spike Lee
Yeah.
features, and he said he does not edit his own films because an editor kind of helps challenge him, might find different themes. How did Sue's expertise challenge you, Norman, or maybe make you think differently about the stories that you would cover in the film?
That's an ongoing thing. I know Sue brings a new set of eyes to it and new sensibilities. And a good editor like Sue sees connections that I don't always see. Remember, I haven't filmed these interviews together.
Right.
In some cases, there were many weeks or months separating different interviews. Sue's looking at them as one long piece of film, and she's seeing those connections. I've always felt that a film is meant to be discovered in the material. I go in with outlines of what I want to film,
Mhm.
but I don't write scripts. I don't like writing scripts. I can write a script after the film is done, after the edit is finished, then you can do it. But I want to discover this in the material that the people have given me. And Sue happens to be marvelous at that. And that's how we've built this film.
Right. So when you're looking at it, it seems like there's many sides and many personalities to Lou Swyer, and it seems like you have different people speaking to those different sides. How are you, since it's not really chronological, how are you suggesting ways to frame it, or how to make the cuts to Norman?
Theme related is one thing rather than chronology.
Mhm.
And so, like Norman was saying, it's kind of like all the material comes to the edit room, and you just start to see like patterns. And you, oh, that relates to what she said. Oh, when he said that, I could hear this coming right afterwards. And you start to find these little transitional patterns. And then from there, you can start to build on the wider themes.
Right.
And then in the background, there's Norm saying, I just can't get over what an amazing man he is and how he did this and this and this. And then you feed that into the works, and it becomes this amazing synchronicity with puzzle pieces.
Right. But I mean, I think it must be a challenge more about selection. I mean, did you try to cover every facet, Norman, or we just left that aside because that's another side of him, but we've already got, the 12 sides of Louis Swyer, or
Paul, I tried not to stop.
right.
We went back to where he was raised. We filmed outside of his childhood home. We talked to his sister. We talked to his kids, obviously. There are so many sides to someone like Lou Swyer. I don't want to leave them out,
Right.
but I don't want to tell a linear story either. We could have done that. We could have gone back to Saki. We could have said he was here, then he went here, then he went here. It makes a very boring film, and that's what we don't want to do. I want to tell the story of an incredibly dynamic man,
Right.
and we need a little dynamite to do that.
I also like, there's a lot of special effects. I assume that's someone other than you, Sue. Is that somebody who's, there's some lightning and
Yes.
beautiful
Well,
like effects. Who does that? Is that the editor?
we start in the editing room with playing with something like that, and you just kind of give tastes of what it could be, kind of sketching it out. And then Norm took it to Jordan McClendon, and he did a beautiful job. And we had a wonderful working relationship via phone, and talked about, okay, he'd throw something in the works that played off of what we'd done, but he'd take it to another level, and then we'd respond to that and kind of play with it that way. It was really wonderful,
Right.
really nice relationship.
COVID made that incredibly difficult, and Jordan was absolutely marvelous to work with. What a terrible disadvantage. He's doing opticals, he's doing fancy stuff, and I want to sit there with him and say, a little more of this, a little
Right.
less of that. Can't do that.
Right.
No.
So we talk on the phone, but for the most part, I would explain what I wanted and he would interpret it. And son of a gun, he got most of it really right.
Right.
And we tweaked some stuff afterwards, which is pretty normal. As we finish this film, he's going to be, he'll have even a more significant role in it. There are some things I want to do. I mean, after all, Swyer was a builder, so we're going to build some stuff.
Right.
Literally.
Oh, okay. I'm looking forward to seeing that. That'll be fun. But when you came to University at Albany, you had a substantial crew. So is the director's job also kind of wrangling and hiring the crew, and how many people? And I did recognize you had several local people on this film. So what was the crew requirements or size or?
The crew, I have to say at the beginning, the crew in Albany is marvelous. There are some really, really good people in town, and that's been a joy to work with them. Somebody like Sean Schaefer, my DP, added so much to this film. He's got such an incredible eye. And when you look at the footage, it's so beautifully lit. It's so well shot. And he did this with no time. He moves so quickly. And he delivered more than I could have expected visually. And that was a joy. And then Sean brought in most of the rest of the crew. These were people he's worked with. And they're really good, really good. My sound was Brian Saptowski, who does a whole lot of films up in Albany.
Mm-hmm.
And he too delivered something that was really, really exceptional.
Right.
The problem with the crews in Albany is that there's no depth. Since I had Sean and I had Brian, the second people are way down the list.
Yeah.
So there were people who were trying to hire these people on the days that I wasn't shooting.
Right.
And that became kind of interesting.
Okay. So that's what I also want to talk about. Both of you are located closer to New York City. I know you've both worked in New York City. What is the difference, if any, between, the quality of the filmmakers in the Albany area versus New York City? I'm sure the price is different. I'm sure you pay double for people in New York City, like with most things. But could you talk about that? Other than the depth, could you get the people you needed here, or do you have to bring some up from New York City?
We brought some people up just because we had to fill in on some occasions.
Right.
We filmed with an unusually large crew for this. On some days, I think we had up to 20 people because we had to move quickly. I really didn't want to tie people up for days while we spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours lighting. So the only way I can solve that is by having more people there to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought people in from everywhere.
Right. And Sue, how COVID actually would shut down from continuing to do interviews and bringing a crew, but how did it change your work as an editor? Is it all, available now remotely, or did you and Norman, wear masks and sit in the same room, or?
Well, we did wear masks and sit in the same room to do this promo piece,
Right.
but we also did shut down the project. Carol shut down the project for a while during COVID, so we're still waiting for it to come back up in full.
Okay.
So yeah, but the new world seems to be Zoom calls, and throwing things up online so everybody can look at that, and then we combine all of our comments and start talking about it, and I make changes, throw those back up online,
Hmm.
and that seems to work. I've been working a lot with Vimeo, actually, is the platform I've been using. Yeah.
Right. And as an editor, what goes into the choices of each cut? You know, as a print person, I'm looking for the money quote or the telling detail or something. Is it more important, like Norma said, you had at least uniform, good lighting and sound, which is not always the case in documentaries of you know real time breaking news or whatever. But are you always looking first for like the quality of the lighting and background, or more like what the person says or how it fits, or how do you make those choices about what to keep and what to hit the cutting room floor with?
Um, as far as the way I work, I think in terms of story first,
Right.
and because all of the other things start to find a home when you have a feeling of a theme or a feeling of a underlying story, and you start to look at things differently just because of what you're trying to emphasize.
Right.
So for instance, maybe there's a dark shot that you wouldn't want to use, but if you're talking about a dark subject, maybe that's a great shot,
Hmm.
you know.
Right.
So it really is form follows function for me.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, and I think Norm, the same in the way we would make
We get,
decisions.
film gets to play with more tools than writers do, and it's
Yeah.
kind of fun. You get words,
Right.
but we get colors and sounds and lights. It's
And
so all of
movement.
a sudden, yeah, it's 3D chess all of a sudden, and it's exciting.
Right. And I know from the 6 minutes that you're gonna let people see that there's a lot of archival, because you're talking about somebody who lived in the first half of the century and beyond, and has been deceased for what, 15 years now. I'm trying to remember what year Lou died. I forget, but he's been dead a few years. So you had to dig into the archives. How plentiful, accessible were those? I know Carol had a lot of material that the family had saved, but how challenging was finding archival material, Norman?
Challenging.
Yeah, I saw
It's
you had Channel
challenging.
6. I know they have a pretty good archives, and
We have gone through various archives. I signed on to archives that are only online. Look back through newspaper archives.
mhm,
Some of the material is good. Some of it is usable. Some of it is not. Most is not.
right,
We were really fortunate that the family has they've kept almost everything. So even when I was finding things online, or finding things from you, from the newspapers, Carol had a copy. Carol would have the originals.
yeah,
Um, all of the material from SPAC, Carol provided to SPAC. So when they put out their books, and I'd say, "Oh, I need this shot," it came from Carol. So
right,
we would always go back. It was Carol and Ed maintained as much material as they possibly could, and it was incredibly valuable.
right. And how about Sue? I know among our own photographers who are photojournalists and news photographers, that they're very reluctant to enhance or change at all a photograph. But if you're dealing with a muddy, fuzzy, dark piece of archival thing, is it acceptable in the documentarian's rule book to enhance it or improve it, or do you have to go with the muddy look?
It depends on the context.
Yeah.
There's there's one shot that still is bothering me, and I think we'll change it before we give it back to you. But it's of Lou dancing, and there's this move down to the feet, and there's a big crack in the in the photo,
Right.
and so that's something. Every time I see that, it's like I'm not looking at the feet, I'm looking at the crack, and so that would be something it's if it's capturing your attention beyond what the meaning is that you want to get to the audience, then it should be fixed.
So is this the kind of conversation you'd have? Maybe Norman's more of a purist and it's like, no, we can't retouch any photos. And I mean, is this part of the discussion, or you're all always on the same
It-
page of this?
Paul, it's ongoing. It really is. I- I- there are times when Sue just simply wants to put something in because it fits. And I'll try to find a better photograph, a better whatever. And other times that I'm the one who insists something goes in.
Right.
We both ultimately know we've got to find the best that we can. There are two shots at SPAC from its opening, and they're fuzzy and they're out of focus. They're black and white and they just look terrible.
Right.
But we decided that they look aged. They look appropriate for what we're doing. And maybe if I found a better shot of that same scene, I would use it, but I'd actually have to look at it. I've gotten so used to the dark and fuzzy shot at this point,
Right.
it seems to fit right.
Right. Right. And how about, obviously his daughter, Carol Swyer, has been involved, and other family members. How much is that a challenge or something to overcome, or how much is it a benefit? I assume total access, providing a lot of archival material you couldn't have gotten if this was just an independent film without the family support. What are the pros and cons of having a family member of your subject directly involved?
In this particular case, it worked out really well.
Mhm.
The archives, the material the family has saved is just incredible.
Right.
And nothing was held back. It's not that, no, you can't use that one. We talked about the propriety of photographs that we used. Is that the right photograph? But never, don't use that material.
Right.
So it was a huge asset, huge.
Right.
There's also one part of it that as a biographer, you would understand this probably better than most, Paul, that when you're working with somebody who's very close to the subject, that a lot of emotion comes up too at different times about what of all this material being dragged out and looked at, and so it's being sensitive to that and allowing time for that as well.
Right. Often historical figures, the most interesting ones are the ones with flaws, the ones who have a fall, the ones who have darkness as well as light. In what I know of Lou Swyer, what I've seen of the film, it seems all bright. Is there a side that gives a more nuanced portrait? Because everybody has their their blemishes, so to speak.
Lou Swyer struggled in his life. He struggled to get where he was. He had the great advantage of being really good. This started from high school, grammar school. He was being recommended for colleges when he was 15 years old and applying and getting in. He was an amazingly talented man. And he's joined the Navy, ended up commanding a battleship. That's pretty good.
That's impressive. That's enough for one career, but I know he was just getting started.
There's a line that he says, that Lou Swyer says, that just amazes me. He's 21 years old, and he said, I knew the first thing I did when I came to Albany was contact the mayor. Say, wait a minute, who does that?
Right.
Lou Swyer was a man who he could see the future. He knew where he wanted to go, and more than most, he actually knew how to get there.
Right.
And that was remarkable. Some of his darkness is in his poetry, and we get to that in the film. He hated tearing down buildings to build new buildings. It gnawed at him all his life. We've got poems from when he was just starting out and mourning the buildings he was tearing down, and looking back at it as a much older man who had torn down all those buildings, still mourning the fact that he had to ruin something to make something.
Right.
Those are good poems. We'll get to those in the film.
I was wondering if that was a facet of his life that you're going to focus on, because I find his poetry very compelling. The fact that here was this person who had to be very busy running a business, very busy, you know, making political connections, very busy as a civic leader, and the time and quiet headspace it takes to write poetry impressed me, you know.
Yeah.
I don't, you and I have 24 hours in the day.
Right.
I think he had 36, maybe 48 every day. He was on so many boards, and everyone tells me that when Lou Swyer was on a board, he did not sit there quietly and collect his check at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
He ran the board.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a board. There was 20 of them.
Right.
And yet his family talks about him being home for dinner every night.
Mm-hmm.
That was just a thing. He didn't necessarily stay after dinner, but he came home and had dinner. And he spent time reading to the kids. And we hear from Ed how he talking about religion and politics and the nature of the connection between people.
Right.
I don't know how he did it. I haven't solved that part yet. I don't know that I ever will.
Does an editor have favorite parts, favorite you know, people that are being interviewed, favorite themes? Do you, Sue? Are there certain ones that's like, I really like this and I want more of this, but Norman's saying like, no, it's enough of that. We're going to go a little heavier on another theme.
Actually, yes, that I get favorites, but I also, as an editor, but also I start to see people as characters. You know, the interviewees are characters, and so sometimes within a section, Norman, I'll be saying, okay, we've had enough of him. No, we need more of him. He has to chime in here, and you start to even imagine like these people, all the interviewees are talking in a room. And somebody would certainly have something to say about that, you know, and so you get this feeling when you're working with it after a while that it's almost like a play, and you're watching it and you're kind of saying, oh, somebody, where is he? He'd say something right now, and you get that feeling. Yeah.
That's great.
And in looking at the footage, Paul, there are some people that want to go back and film again. I don't necessarily know what I want to ask them, but I love the way they explain things. So I want to go back and say, explain some more things to me.
Right. I mean, you've got a who's who in the excerpt that you showed me. You've got people who were central to all these different facets of his life. I think you've done a great job of choosing the people to help tell this story. Do you have favorite facets of his life, Norman?
It's like asking which of my kids I like better. This is a man who devoured life. He really did. He took it in giant bites and climbed on top and controlled it. Rare individual. So his poetry fascinates me. The fact that he was able to not only build SPAC, but conceive of SPAC. That's the part that just boggles my mind, as it did Elizabeth Sobel.
Right.
And then turn around and run the place.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Right.
Who does that?
Right.
Paul, it would be like the man who built your offices at the Writers Institute, then becoming chairman of the board and running the Writers Institute. It doesn't happen.
No, I know. No, he was I like the term polymath, somebody who has many areas of expertise. And but both of you, you know, you didn't know him during his life. You never personally met him. Does it feel like you've known him now? And if you could go to dinner with him, what would you ask him? I'll start with Sue. What would be of interest? Something you're dying to ask him that maybe doesn't come up in these hours and hours of interviews and footage.
Well, I would ask him about the river because he loved the river when he was a child.
Hmm.
And then he always kept his life around water. In the Navy, he joined the Navy, not the Army.
Right.
He was the captain of a ship or a commander of a battleship. And so you think, well, how could he step into those shoes? Well, he grew up on the river. He was probably playing on little boats when he was a kid.
Right.
And then later on in the film, we'll tell a beautiful little story about the river that kind of comes back. So
Right.
I would talk to him about the river.
Nice. And how about you, Norman?
I would want to talk to him about acting.
Mhm.
He loved the theater.
Right.
He just loved every aspect of it. One of his proudest possessions was his equity card. He wanted
Yeah,
to
I guess
be in
I did
theater.
not know he had an equity card. That's
He
interesting.
had an equity card, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. He did summer stock for 3 years. Um, and he would have been an actor if he could have found steady work. But, this was 1944, 1943.
Right.
Finding steady work, period, was difficult. Finding it in theater was almost impossible. So he fell into something else, but he found a way to make a living, but he never let go of the theater,
Right.
ever.
Right.
And I'd love to talk to him about that.
That's great. Any parting thoughts at this point? Are you trying to project a release date or when you will be, showing this at film festivals? We'll hopefully be able to do our film festival in person next year, next spring. Maybe you'll have the whole film done then, or do you have a date in mind, or is it kind of open at this point to wrap it up?
At this point, given our hiatus, given the universe, I've given up on a date.
Right.
Yes, I would like to have this thing done and finished within the next year.
Right.
Presumably, we go to festivals. I want, beyond finishing this film, I wanted to recut it for schools.
Mm,
Kids need to know about this man.
right.
And they need to understand, as we say here, what a hero is.
Right.
He's not a football player. He's not a singer. It's something else. And I really want to take this film, write a leader's guide for schools, and get it as seen as broadly as humanly possible.
Mm, that's great. And Sue, is there a definite, time limit? Can it go 2 hours? Can it go 2 hours and 20 minutes? Is like, what is your limit? Have you and Norman discussed, you can't have a 4 hour epic or something or a mini
No.
series. How long is it going to be, do you think?
Well, we kind of are working it all the way through. We still have quite a bit. Well, we're over the halfway point,
Hmm.
but then we'll rein it in a little bit more. I think once we've let it be sprawling like the river,
Right.
we'll start to dam it up a little bit here and
Right.
there, create a little wetland over here.
So you're talking like a 1.5, two
Maybe
hour?
1.5.
90 minutes. 90
Yeah,
minutes is where we're aiming right now.
yeah.
And just as a cautionary note, this 5-minute promo film runs 6.5 minutes.
You and your editor got to, you're going to have to put some things on the cutting room floor, but there is no cutting room floor anymore. You just put it to the side, like pull it
Put it to the
apart, and then you
side.
can put it back in. And yeah. So what's the program? Is it Final Cut Pro now or something, or what do
Right
you?
now, I'm using Premiere.
Oh,
Yeah,
Premiere. Yeah.
yeah.
Excellent.
And yeah, it's funny because I love editing, and it feels like you're playing an instrument when you really get into the rhythm of things.
Hmm.
You've put the writing, you know, you've got the writing a little bit in hand, and then you just start to work the material, and happy accidents happen. And you look at them, and they'll take you a little bit in another direction or a little in another, and you play with the rhythms and the movement between shots, and
Right.
it's just a joy.
Well, I
So
like that. I think on the notion of happy accidents, I hope you find many more happy accidents as you continue to create this documentary, this biography in a way of Louis A. Swyer. The title, at least the working title for now, is The Builder. It covers the incredibly rich and diverse life and legacy of Lou Swyer. We're very pleased that you're allowing our audiences to see a 6-minute promo of it at the Albany Film Festival, and we're very honored and we thank you to be part of it. We're speaking with director Norman Berns and editor Susan Peehl. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
thank you,
Been a
Paul.
pleasure.
Thanks a lot.